Hello, everybody. This is Alicia Garcia-Herrero. I'm Senior Research Fellow at Bruegel, and we're here today to talk about microchips or semiconductors. Not only that, we're also going to talk about Europe's economic sovereignty or strategic autonomy, which is actually very much related. One of the key aspects for Europe to strive for that strategic autonomy is really to avoid bottlenecks, to avoid dependence in certain sectors. And of course, semiconductors has become a crucial sector where I'm based in Asia, and in particular in China, Greater China, actually. I'm now in Taipei. We tend to we tend to characterize semiconductors as the new oil. And this is because China imports more semiconductors than oil. And on that basis, you can imagine how important this topic is for us in Europe as well. So on that note, I'm going to basically introduce you to our panel very, very quickly, because we really want to talk about ideas here, and you can find the profiles of our distinguished panel on our web at Bruegel. But just very briefly, we have here Niclas Poitiers, who is also our fellow at Bruegel and who's written a wonderful report on semiconductors for the European Parliament and knows very much about the in and outs of this sector. We also have Jay Lewis from Microsoft, who of course knows a lot from the industry perspective about the sector. Then we have Piotr Arak, who is an expert in economic sovereignty, European economic sovereignty, and he enlighten us on what it really means for us in Europe. And then, of course, last but not least, Stefan Mengel, who is going to tell us about Germany's approach to both the industry and this important concept, which is basically to basically reduce our bottlenecks, and Germany being such an important manufacturing power in the world. I'm sure that there's lots of lessons we can learn from you, Stefan. So on that note, we're going to move straight to a few opening remarks from each of our panelists. And we're going to start with Niclas, if I may, on really a little bit of an overview of the sector for those listening to us now. Thank you. Thank you, Niclas.
Thank you, Alicia, for the very kind introduction. I will use my introductory remarks first to set the stage, and then later maybe trying to give a few first thoughts on strategic autonomy. I think we will discuss this in much more detail later. Given that it's just 5 minutes, I want to highlight also the report Alicia mentioned that Pauline Weil and I have written. We have many more details on there for anyone interested in this. But to basically give a general narrative for our discussion, we have this global shortage of semiconductors, which are so essential to our economy, which really have put this topic on the center stage. Semiconductors are the computer chips or the underlying technology that we use in our laptops, that we use in cars and all kinds of things. I think the first important thing to know is that it's not such a thing as one semiconductor. And what I want to kind of try to convince you in my introductory remark is to say that this narrative of semiconductors being the new oil is a bit misleading, because it's very different from a commodity like oil. It's really we have many different applications for semiconductors, and we have many different needs, and it's really produced in a global supply chain. The supply chain is really anchored around East Asia, both in terms of the demand. Most of our laptops and all the kind of digital goods, the cameras on which we're recording this event, are imported from China and are the most important, maybe the most important export goods from China. Around 96% of what's classified as high-tech exports going to the US from China are ICT goods. But also China, as Alicia mentioned, is really dependent on the imports. And also these imports, the production takes place in East Asia. And notably here, Taiwan and in South Korea, which are the only two countries where we really have the cutting edge production of these chips. And now that we face this shortage where European car manufacturers in particular, but many other industries, including Microsoft maybe or big computer manufacturers, have problems producing because they lack these chips. And this has really put the question on the table of is the supply chain of semiconductor resilient enough? Are we over-reliant on particular geographies or particular locations? So here, on the other hand, we have seen that this chips dependence, in particular of China, has been used by the United States for sanctions. So the United States has put some Chinese companies on sanctions lists. And even though the US itself doesn't export a lot of semiconductors to China, the leading manufacturers all use US IP and US software. And therefore, US sanctions have an executory reach, really choking some of the large ICT manufacturers in China. All of this put this kind of question of where we produce the chips and how we produce the chips, all this makes it kind of a geopolitical question. And now we have the question in Europe, what would you do about it? And we have seen this CHIPS Act now introduced, and when it was introduced, I personally was first quite optimistic, because we see now a bit of a new narrative in Europe also around research and development, which is where I think this we should really focus on, which is where Europe already has a very strong position. We have good research centers in Europe, particularly the EMAC in Belgium, but also we produce the equipment on which these semiconductors are built. But what is emerging now more and more is that really the focus on this CHIPS Act, and at least from what we hear from Thierry Breton, is really trying to get this manufacturing of this chip, the fabrication, back to Europe. And I think the big question that we have to answer if we want to do this is it worth spending billions of taxpayer money on getting the semiconductors to Europe, and what kind of benefits would that bring us in terms of strategic autonomy? Here, I think that this kind of metaphor we use of oil is misleading, because really what these chips are is very specialized, and we have an interdependence in the value chain. It's not that we have one producer, we have it in oil, where if you are sitting on an oil field and you can sell this to other people, these other people are dependent on you. But here, at least for Europe, we import chips, but more importantly, we import a lot of goods in which chips embedded, but also we participate ourselves in the value chain. And no one in this value chain can do it alone. There's no one also outside America that can replicate the IP and chip design and the software in which are chips designed. There's no one else that can do this. There's basically a monopoly of the United States, which they have used for their sanctions. No one else except Samsung and TSMC in South Korea and Taiwan can produce these chips, but also no one outside of ASML, the Netherlands, know how to produce the machines. So really, we have here a sense of interdependence. And instead of thinking about semiconductors as a commodity where we really have to think about where they're produced, I think we really have to think about it as a network of supply chains. And the question then really becomes to which extent we can use our leverage and strengthen our leverage in this supply chain to make sure it's resilient. Maybe lastly, to say a few things that I think everyone agrees on. The first one is that the shortage that we have right now, none of the policies we do right now will help overcome them. Building new factories will take years, and the sector itself is prone to this kind of oversupply and sometimes shortages. So really, the question here is much less on the current problem. It's really more about the long term. I will leave it at that. I think the rest we will discuss later on.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, quite a few interesting ideas. Semiconductors are an oil because oil is a commodity, and semiconductors are indeed an integral part of the value chain, which means that there's huge interdependence, and therefore we can't just think of, a single producer, a single consumer. And I'm sure we'll have a very heated discussion on whether Europe should produce or shouldn't produce. And I'm not going to get to that until we hear other speakers. So I think at this point, it would be nice to hear about the industry, Jay. I mean, how you perceive the importance of this sector in your company, in the sector as such. Thank you. Your floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And first, just thank you for the chance to be here. Very excited to be part of this panel. Maybe just start by explaining a little bit more about my perspective. So I do work for Microsoft and certainly sort of bring the perspective of a large commercial systems company. Prior to Microsoft, I actually spent time with the US Department of Defense, and specifically at DARPA, or the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, focusing on microelectronics for national security as well. So I sort of have, these things seem sort of interesting to me. I've been thinking about them for a while, but seeing the contrast between some of the government perspectives and the industry perspectives, and very much resonate with many of Niclas's comments. And similarly, I'll maybe just introduce a few points that I'm sure we'll dive into. Part of the reason that I am at Microsoft to begin with is something that I was very happy to see in my time in the U.S. government, which was more than in several decades, I think, an increasing alignment between commercial industry and government interests, particularly on two vectors. One is resiliency, and the other is integrity. I would love to talk about the security and the integrity of chips, for another hour, but I don't think that's the main topic for today. But certainly resiliency and autonomy and the challenges that we're having in the supply chain are something where industry, commercial companies, and governments who often at the end of the day feel the impact of some of these supply chain challenges as well, have a lot of shared interests. One of the things that I would say, very broadly speaking, that I've seen is sort of an interesting contrast often between the government perspective, where you tend to talk about what you can control, what you can manage, what you can regulate. And so you hear about things like autonomy. What can I do to have sort of control over things? And from a commercial perspective, which again has the same sort of shared goals of efficient markets and efficient supply, you hear more about diversity. You hear more about options and the ability to manage disruptions and optimize through some of these challenges. And so I think it's interesting to sort of compare and contrast those two perspectives. And I appreciate that Niclas sort of brought up the complexity of the market. I mean, it's an amazingly complex market, and I will maybe put in the marker now that I'm not sure autonomy is possible. I'm not sure it's possible or even a good strategy for the U.S. And I think for the Europe and the EU, it would be a much more difficult objective to achieve. So thinking about strategic partnerships, thinking about diversification, I think are all potentially ways that you can achieve maybe autonomy by other means. And then just one other thing that I'd like to mention, which is there are, in my mind, you could probably think about this differently, but I think about supply chain challenges being in two categories. One that we're feeling today, these are disruptions, these are slowdowns, these are supply challenges. Most of these are being felt actually in older technology. We have, the industry every few years sort of updates, and advances their ability to make better and better chips. And we tend to, have these older technologies that just sort of sit there, they're paid for, they're just making chips sort of in perpetuity, and as long as they stay full, they're making money. And we've actually seen an increase in demand for some of these older technologies, which are creating some of these supply chain disruptions. There's another risk, which is, what I think of as discontinuities. These are sort of some of the potentially, drastic things that are some of, sort of black swan events that could happen, that could have, a dramatic impact on the economy worldwide. And so I think both of these are potential risks that should be accounted for by policymakers. And with that, I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Jay. I think basically we've heard a lot from you about the complexities, and in a way the dream, like how dreamy it is really to think that we can be fully independent on. But I have to say, I mean, there is like a gray area from where we stand today in Europe to full independence, and perhaps the way to rephrase our ambition, or at least the European Commission's ambition here in Niclas, is maybe just, move that pendulum a little bit further from where it is today. But on that note, I think it's time to talk about Europeans' dream, i.e. that of basically economic autonomy, strategic autonomy. We've seen so many ways to actually say something that we can't say otherwise because we're not a nation. So we need to find all of these interesting expressions to nail it, to explain to the world what we want to do. And I won't be the one doing that, but it will be Piotr, and being such an expert on this field. So the floor is yours, Piotr.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I'm an expert on strategic autonomy, and even if there's an expert on strategic autonomy.
Sorry, just a second. We can't hear you well. Maybe can you check the volume?
Now, do you hear me better? Still?
No, maybe it's off.
No, it's operational. Okay.
No, it's fine. Now it's fine.
Now it's working. Okay. Sorry for that. So technical issues always a problem. So as I was saying, I don't know if there's an actual expert on strategic autonomy because we would have to define it first. So probably there are many generalists actually speaking about the subject, and probably I'm another one of them. So first off, we do a lot of studies, and we actually do also foresights. We did with the Conference on the Future of Europe, we did studies with experts from Poland. So approximately more than 100 people doing a foresight study on strategic autonomy and how it's going to influence trade within the European Union. So from a Central European perspective, and actually 85%. Of the people we asked saw microchips as one of the sectors that could be reshored to Central Europe, so to Poland. So they see it as a possibility and as a desirable option. But actually 20% said that this is probable. So there's a desire to have, more production of microchips within Europe or Central Europe, but the probability of that happening is just one in 5. So this is the first point I want to make. So this is kind of in your playground, Niclas. In semiconductors, the EU is relying on imports. The share of extra EU imports is higher than half of the EU imports, and substitution is really not easy in order to even with the European Chips Act and even with the proposals that we have. What I think is quite interesting is happening on the regular market, so outside of what is the European Commission is trying to do. We see big American corporation as, I don't know, I can advertise probably another microchip producer from the United States, who said that is going to invest $20 billion in America in order to produce, increase the capacity of microchip development in the United States, but also a significant $7 billion in the European Union. And in the next decade. So the possible sites for this new American investments include France, Poland, Germany, but it also means to increase the production of microchips which are used in automotive production. And this is where this division between new modern technology and old technology comes into play. I'm no microchip expert, but I know that there is a difference between microchips used in the automotive industry, although maybe it's not that big in the more complex cars that we see right now, and for example in mobile devices as these. And this brings us to the issue that we're going, for example, to pursue production of the goods that have dated technology. And are actually, because we don't have a smartphone industry, a wearable industry within the European Union, then probably if we pursue a policy of increasing the capacity of production within the European Union of some of the goods that are a bit dated, then we're just going to end up with fewer value added in the process, because this is not the top-notch modern technology. This is what is produced in the United States, especially in Taiwan, and especially in Southeast Asia. So this is, I think, a big issue. Then we also see a charm offensive of Taiwan, which is very active in cooperation, for example, with Lithuania, also increasing the capacity, a semiconductor talent and research program in Lithuania, which is in order to boost the capacity of Europe in this market. But the issue, for example, with this international cooperation is that in case of this big American corporation is that it's looking for subsidies. And this is actually what they're saying. So they want to see additional financing from the European Commission for the additional projects that they're going to make. And these are not European corporations. So then the European taxpayers' money is going to go into the pocket of an international corporation, especially having nothing against the Americans, but it's still it's not strategic autonomy if you're doing something with a different company from a different region. And getting to the end, my short introduction, I just wanted to say that in short term, this issue will not be addressed with the policies of increasing production capacity in the European Union. This will take years to come. Up until 2023, we're probably going to go into overcapacity in Asia. And we're going to see an overproduction of semiconductors by mid-2023. And by mid-2022, we're just going to still be in a shortage period. So I guess there's no easy solution to the problem than just to wait to buy a new car another 8 months. Thanks.
Thank you, Piotr. I really like this ending, which makes me hopeful that it's all about time. We just need to wait and it will be solved miraculously, or not miraculously, simply because others will produce for us and there will be overcapacity. Let's talk about that later, but I think it's a very good turning point to Stefan. And I think, Stefan, you have a presentation, so we are looking forward to your views. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think the presentation is to be seen. My first message is, and this echoes what has been said already, that the semiconductor value chain spreads around.
Stefan, sorry, if you could just press the full screen, it would be easier for everybody to see, if you don't mind. Yeah, yes, if you go down, no, just a second. If you go down, yeah, right there on the right, exactly. And there we go. It will be much better. Thank you.
Much better. Thank you very much. So first message is that the semiconductor value chain spreads around the globe, and no region, no nation around the world is close to an autonomy. Even the US, which might be still in the strongest position on the global scale, are dependent from other regions in the world. So there is no region which is close to autonomy, and therefore it wouldn't be a good goal for Europe to aim for autonomy. So second message is we should not talk about older and newer technologies. So the semiconductor world is quite heterogeneous, and it's not only about the nodes, the feature sizes where chips are produced. So there are many other features of chips which might be relevant for specific application areas. Look at the left chart. You see that Europe is in a weak position when it comes to the sheer production of microchips. Only 9% of the global semiconductor production is originating from Europe. But if you go down to specific sectors, for instance, on the right side, the automotive industry or the automotive demand for semiconductors, Europe is in a quite strong position. So it depends indeed on the field of application when you talk about whether Europe is in a strong or in a weak position. So we need to focus on those microchips which fit to our ecosystem in Europe, which fulfill demands of specific industries in Europe. And that's one of the important messages I want to convey. So Europe is not in all fields in a weak position. There are some niches, strong niches, where Europe is even leading. And this is shown in the next slide. I try to differentiate between fields where Europe is leading, where Europe is competitive, and where Europe is dependent. So Europe is leading in specific fields of semiconductor technology. That's power electronics, which you need for instance, for electromobility. Europe is strong in smart system integration, sensors, and many heterogeneous chips and chip systems, which are relevant for even for small and medium-sized enterprises and that sector of the economy. Europe is leading in the EUV technology, the only technology which is worldwide able to produce the leading edge nodes, and which is not that much known. Europe is also leading in fab automation of the chip manufacturing sites we have in Europe. So Industry 4.0 for chip manufacturing is also a European stronghold. We also are quite competitive, for instance, in science and research. We are also competitive in security electronics. This is a niche, but it's an important niche where European chip makers have a strong position on global markets. Chip design is also an important field where we, on one side, depend on US IPR, but on the other side, we have a lot of strongholds for specific chip systems. And last but not least, advanced packaging is a European strength where you combine chiplets, so parts of chips from different sources, from different manufacturers. You can combine them in a certain manufacturing process to one innovative chip system, which at the end of the day makes the difference whether your product is competitive or not. This is not only because of the performance, it's also because of the security. You don't give your knowledge to one manufacturer, say in another region of the world. You combine the knowledge in the chip system, which you can manufacture, for instance, in Europe on site. But as you know, of course, we are dependent in a number of fields, memory chips, high-performing processors, accelerators. We are dependent from US IPR, and as mentioned already, we are dependent from chip manufacturing, from nodes lower than 22 nanometers. All these things need to be imported. So that, of course, that brings Europe in a delicate situation. But what the question is, and the question was already raised, what can we do about it? So in fields where we are leading, we should try to keep the position, and R&D innovation is key to hold this position, and we can be quite optimistic that we play a role in these fields also in the future. Where we are competitive, of course, we can try to push further. And there's one thing we should concentrate on, at least this is my opinion. We should concentrate on chip design, electronic design automation. This is key because the chip design is relevant for the knowledge. If you are, say, a car maker, and if you want to have a dedicated solution, you need to design your own chip. And then later, when the chip design is fixed, you can give it to a manufacturer somewhere else in the world. But first, you need to put your know-how into a certain chip design, and the leverage and the value creation of the chip design is significant. So we should create We should focus more than in the past on chip design in Europe. That should be, in my point of view, a priority. Advanced packaging is strategic also for security reasons. I mentioned that already. But what should we do in fields where we are dependent? Memory chips. My point of view is we should do nothing right now. There's no good leverage to get back to a, say, competitive or even leading position. If you look at high-performing processors, that's a relevant field because you need those processors of higher classes for the autonomous driving, for the industry automation of the future. So the European key industries need processors of higher classes, and this is something where we should gain sovereignty, and we should start with chip design first. US IPR is dominant, and this can't be changed in a couple of years. That can't be changed, and that's my point of view. It shouldn't be changed, but we have the opportunity to gain sovereignty by increasing RISC-V research. RISC-V is an open source software which defines processor cores. That's something which can be used by everybody in the world. And there are also a lot of projects underway to use RISC-V to have a more open computer architecture, or better to say processor architecture. That could be something where we should concentrate in Europe and where we have significant opportunities to gain sovereignty. Last but not least, chip manufacturing. As already mentioned, we would need massive subventions to attract non-EU investors, and that would boost Europe to a new orbit, and that would be of significance for the next decade and even the next 20 years. But let me summarize with having a view on three options. Option one is, I call it strategic patience. We should concentrate, we should invest on boosting innovation in and from Europe. That means we should increase our investments in R&D, in the so-called IPSAI, and also we should concentrate on the EU Chips Act to bring us in a better position with regards to the economic competition. There's an option two. I mentioned that that's the new orbit. We should try to attract non-EU investments into the lower nodes. But we should do that plus option one without neglecting our European ecosystem. And there's, of course, a third option, which would mean disruption. That would mean we should concentrate only on non-EU investors. We should concentrate only on attracting manufacturing of the lower nodes. And if you look at the bottom of the transparency on a scale from full autonomy to total dependence, I would roughly put Europe between sovereignty and total dependence. And I've indicated where the option could bring us closer and how the options could bring us closer to sovereignty. My personal opinion is that option three would not help us to gain sovereignty, since we would neglect our ecosystem, which is a stronghold in Europe, an ecosystem between the chip makers and the industries such as the car makers and many others. This ecosystem is one of the strongholds, and we should invest in every scenario in this ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. If you could, or perfect. No more slides, although they were so interesting. I have to say, I've been taking pics. Probably we can share the slides, but just in case, I found them really fascinating. All of these different ways to get option one, option two, option three. And I can't agree more that just by importing, or put it this way, by offering subsidies for somebody else to produce, might not be necessarily the way to achieve that autonomy. I have to say though that's in a way what Japan is doing at this current juncture with TSMC, and perhaps the reason is that Japan already has a lot of design, I mean, R&D on semiconductors, you know, so they are not really like, it is a country that already has that in place. So it can perhaps go option 3 without even telling us they're going option 3, if you see what I mean. So it is interesting to see that those offering those huge subsidies, the US or Japan, do have the design and you know in different, as you said, ecosystems. But so I found it really fascinating, and I think now I wanted to do a little bit of a round of interactions, but because it's 9:36, I'm going to check Slido just in case people are waiting. And indeed, we already have 3 questions. So frankly speaking, I always think that, you know, our audience comes first. I have many questions, but I think I will keep them for the time being, and just read aloud some of the questions that are now flooding into our Slido. So we have one on this idea that isn't there a risk for Europe that by doubling down on existing strengths in production rather than diversifying, it might not kind of get into obsolete technologies. So one could think of maybe the auto industry, since you mentioned, Stefan, and the idea of electric vehicles, the type of, I mean, how small, yeah, are the semiconductors needed? I have no idea, but the question is, are they the same? Are they different? Are we investing in the wrong sectors? I think that's a very interesting question. So, because it might be too long to get everybody to answer the different questions, maybe if you allow me, I take Stefan and Jay for this one, and then I'll move to other questions and I will try to divide the questions to make it more interactive. So who wants to take it? Yeah, Stefan.
It's Jay, please. It's Jay, please.
Oh,
Jay, okay.
Sure. I can start things off. So yeah, I think, you know, there is probably, you know, a risk in maybe being too focused, and I don't think that's what Stefan was suggesting, but just maintaining your strengths, I think is a good thing, and then being strategic about sort of where you diversify. So if you take automotive chips, for example, you know, from a technology perspective, they're not particularly differentiated, and in fact, you know, when auto chip manufacturers need excess capacity, they go to Europe, right? So, or sorry, to Asia. And so, you know, but having, I believe having sort of a deep, you know, advantage in certain areas is something that you want to make sure that you continue to invest in, continue to keep strong, you know, and use as leverage, because again, I think we've established earlier in the conversation, there are too many things to try to, you know, spread your bets around. And so I actually very much agree with Stefan, you know, in terms of strengths, make sure that you keep those strong ones. I think you have, in my mind, 2 true crown jewels in Europe, you know, things that are just unique in the world. And they've both been mentioned. One is ASML. I don't think there will be a Western company, certainly, that competes in that technology. Probably ever. And the other is IMEC. You know, there is a lot of semiconductor research around the world, but you know, a place with sort of the concentration of both the facilities and the people, you know, IMEC is something that is relied on by semiconductor companies around the world to come and collaborate and learn about their own technology and how to move it forward. So, you know, I do think that shoring up the advantages that you do have is good and an important thing to do. And I think if you try to actually differentiate too much, you risk actually, you have a different risk, which is, you know, starting to fall behind in places where you currently are ahead.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think we should capitalize on the existing ecosystem with regard to the car manufacturers. Is an ecosystem where the European chip manufacturers deliver lots of microcontrollers which find their way into the modern car. But when it comes to the autonomous car, we need to have different chips from today. So chips which have more computing power, which need to have a specific design first. Design first. When it comes to an improved design, you need to go then to a more advanced production site with lower nodes. But first of all, you need to have the design. That makes the difference whether your car is better than a car from the competitor. So we need to stimulate this ecosystem that the car manufacturers together with the chip manufacturers learn to be better in design. And this design will be more heterogeneous in the future than in the past. New design paradigms are looming at the horizon, the neuromorphic designs which are better able to accommodate AI on chip than connecting to a cloud or something. So there is a lot of new paradigms underway where Europe can find its place in the global competitive scale.
Well, thanks so much. Just I know we have a list of questions, but just a clarification for my own curiosity. What if we imagine, we focus on design and we have these great ideas on how to improve the design, and then we look around, we need a fab, but we need a fab for, as you said, very low nanometer. I mean, what if, which is the situation today, in my humble opinion, there aren't very many. You know, like you can have the greatest design in the world, but what if at that level, we're not talking about memory chips here, at that level of nanometer, whatever, below 22, well below, you just don't find the fabs. What do we do? That to me, and let's not even get started with the geopolitics of it all, and the role of Taiwan, and you name it. What do we do? So I mean, the idea in principle is wonderful. We stay at the higher order of higher thinking level, but what if nobody can produce it, or if the production is there's such a bottleneck that we just can't go further? That's the question I would have, Stefan. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's not that black and white. I mean, you're right, but it's not the case that there is no production available. So there are production sites, and not all of these chips need really to be produced in these lower nodes. Medium-sized nodes, say 40 nanometers, 22 nanometers, 28 nanometers, is for many applications fine, even better, because it's more robust and more reliable. And so this is, well, that's different. So, and as already mentioned, we might run into a situation where we have overcapacity, but there's no situation where we have over design or something. So overcapacity is a specific risk which should be treated by specific sectors in the economy, such as foundries. This is nothing for a car manufacturer. Well, I don't see that single point of failure.
That's a wonderful answer. Jay, sorry.
Sorry. I might just add that, we've had a couple of decades of, pretty good success of, these companies at the leading edge, understanding, what the markets demand, doing forecasts, doing projections. Sometimes they're a bit high, a bit low, but installing the right amount of capacity. They actually need, more and more capacity, more and more, profit, frankly, to be able to fund the development of the next node. So they are very much incentivized to make sure that there's enough manufacturing capacity for the world's needs. And so far at the leading edge nodes, that's largely held true. So, fingers crossed that will not be a problem.
Okay, thank you. That's great. So again, we have so many more questions, so I need to really rush. So can the slides be shared? Of course. Then we will avoid people making picks, I mean, like I did. So there's an interesting question on whether TSMC is responsible for the shortage in the automotive sector. Can we solve this shortage by, using advanced components? So that's one for, I guess, Jay and Stefan, but I'm going to move ahead and read a few more because we have many questions, and I want now to give the floor to Niclas and Piotr. So, the idea is not, so there's a comment on, is it really about strategic autonomy or is it about reducing dependence? What's the objective, basically? I mean, how ready are we even to this more humble objective, which is reducing dependence on this specific sector? I'm adding that part to kind of make it more focused on our event. The issue is also how much is this everything we're talking here? I mean, yes, we're talking about chips, but the broader concept of strategic autonomy, economic sovereignty, something that has been accelerated by COVID and climate change and globalization, the fact that, we can't rely on globalization. These are many questions, but, as they keep on coming and we don't have much time, I thought I would just jump, throw them on you. And I'm going to now ask Niclas and Piotr to choose whatever you like from this number of questions, and we'll take it. I will take the few more if time allows. Thank you. Who wants to start?
I can start maybe. So I think the question really for us is for the policy in the EU and for the European Chips Act is what problem do you want to solve and what are the right tools for this. I think everyone agrees on the importance of this sector. I think everyone agrees on that it is a sector where the EU could do more to enhance the strategic autonomy. The question really is, and if we talk a lot about now the fabrication, and if we use the framework that Stefan proposed about this different option, the question is really about what would it cost, and is this worth the cost of this attracting non-EU investors, in particular in the high-end manufacturing? And what is here on the table, just to make sure we understand the numbers, what is on the table here, what Commissioner Breton is proposing is matching the US Chips Act. Everyone is focusing on fabrication at the moment. The Japanese is doing this, the Chinese are doing this, having different problems than the rest, but also US is doing this. And US is putting $50 billion on the table. If we want to match that, there's like 30 billion in terms of subsidies for manufacturing. That is way beyond normal state aid what we've seen in Europe. If it is much higher than we've seen what we see normally in general block exemptions, much higher what we've seen in past ICPIs, for instance, in the past ICPI in microelectronics. So if we say we want to put something like 30 billion or even 10 billion on the table, I think we have to ask a really good question. A, do we spend this money in the most effective way? And B, is this money actually necessary, or could we spend it on different things? And this is where I'm very skeptical on the current strategy. It's not that I think that manufacturing is not important, but I think the problem is really also what Jay was saying is if we kind of try to go now in a subsidy race with the United States, with Japan, with South Korea, maybe on the lower notes with China, we spend a lot of money on a capacity where we're behind, but where we also have not a chance of moving on. And the question is, which problem do we want to solve? I very much agree with Jay if we look at about the problem of the supply to European industries. That is a problem that the industry itself is very good at solving. There is a lot of incentive. So the production capacity we see right now is the production capacity that people anticipated a few years back when they decided on whether to invest in factories or not. And there's always going to be a mismatch. But I'm very skeptical if we really to believe that the government can do this mismatch better than the private sector. So I think really when we say we want to reshore manufacturing capacity to Europe, the problem is not capacity in the sense, it's really about do we gain leverage with this? And I'm not convinced we will. In the end of the day, the goal of the Commission is 20% of the global market. I haven't met an analyst of the industry outside the Commission that believes we can reach this goal. Maybe we can, but I'm super skeptical, and I think I'm not alone with this. But also, even if we have 20%, what does it give us? Does it give us leverage to push China around, to push the US around? Of course not. 20% of the global market is still a small share of the fabrication market. If we really want to to defend ourselves from geopolitical rivalries, from geopolitical pressure, really need to look at key capacities, which no one else has, and we have these capacities. So it's really, if we think about geopolitics, it's really about having key stones, key nodes in our hand, and we already have some of them, and making sure that we keep them. And everything else, I think we really need to think about what does it give us, and is it worth this massive public investment going in a subsidy race for the United States, which has putting a lot of money for military reasons. But in the end of the day, even if we have this production capacity, we might make our automotive manufacturing, autonomous car, independent of Taiwanese manufacturing. But still, we will buy our smartphones from China with Taiwanese chips. We will buy our laptops from China. We become not a bit less dependent on East Asia. So I think we should kind of give up this kind of general dream of autonomy, but more think about how we can gain leverage and make sure that in the interdependency, our interdependency is not leveraged against us.
Well, if I can...
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Piotr.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, very shortly, I just wanted to add that I'm very skeptical about having increased production capacity on a market that is very, very prone to economic cycles. We have this problem because the capacity of production was planned last year when we didn't saw this possibility of increased GDP growth. We also had some fires in the Renaissance plant. There are some frosts in Texas. There are some other elements that created this perfect storm that we see right now in the semiconductor business. But still, to increase the production capacity, it means that we're going to have lower value added to a very, very risky business. And I don't know if it's worth investing in. Probably the plan that, for example, Germany or France has to increase the production capacity, but also through R&Ds. I think it's the German government that said it pledges 3 billion euros in order to increase the semiconductor R&D and investments in France by 2030. So this probably is more so as a reason, more so a solution to the problem. But of course, I would love to see more industrial production, Industry 4.0, being more automated, more value added. But I don't know if we're going to truly be able to achieve that in this specific field of industry. With seeing how this market is treating us right now, and if the central planner, being the European Commission, is actually going to be better than the industry itself. So what I would say, and my proposal is to think about secure value chains, to have diversified sources of production. So not only to have two production plants for the automotive industry, which actually with this bullwhip create this issue for the whole economy itself in the European Union. So just to have more diversified portfolio. And this probably is far easier to create with different cooperation than just to create a production capacity in the European Union.
Thank you, Piotr. I have unbelievably interesting questions on Slido. Yeah. And we have 7 minutes to go. And what it makes it even worse is that I still have a question. It's a very naive question, especially perhaps for Jay. And this is the problem of being invited to Bruegel, that we're very blunt and straight. Let me ask you this question, and then I move to Slido. Just out of curiosity, why do we need to offer subsidies? I'm just thinking aloud, okay? Why do we need to offer subsidies? We have a very diversified single market with countries, and Piotr mentioned it at the very beginning, yeah? Eastern Europe, frankly speaking, we still have a huge variety of subsidies. We have a lot of engineers, maybe not as many as China, but we do have engineers in Europe. I mean, can somebody explain me why we can't attract chip makers? I can't understand it. We're not the US. I mean, sorry to say, but we have a humongous diversity of wages in Europe, and we have producers, I mean, basically the manufacturing capacity of Europe is not comparable to that of the US. So this is the question. I know that, you know, I'm going to give you some time to take it while I read. Um, Probably more interesting questions on Slido, very technical questions, some of them, but I found them quite, I mean, we have very interesting listeners, I have to tell you. It's quite impressive. So one thing that I found interesting is this anonymous, by the way, and rightly so. Given many believe on Moore's law, so it's like they keep on coming, so this gets moving back and forth. The idea is that is it credible what, you know, Thierry Breton is expecting, that we can get to such low node semiconductor production? Is this a dream? Is it possible? Should we not focus on something more doable, less costly? That's one question. What's your take on NVIDIA's ARM merger? And this is, I mean, I had a very similar idea on ARM architecture, and because I'm based here in Greater China, you know, all of the stories about China's subsidiary and what's happening there. I mean, is this a game changer? This potential merger, I understand that is not yet fully confirmed, and rightly so. That makes it even more interesting why it isn't. And I think, I mean, because it was mentioned, I will finish by mentioning a question on ASML and if this is so important for Europe. This is our one of our crown jewels. What is the EU doing about it? I mean, how are we defending this wonderful jewel? And there are many more, but they keep on coming, so we need to wrap it up. Quite a few questions were for Stefan and in a way more like industry, so I leave the floor to them, and then kind of a minute to end on time to Piotr and Niclas. So let's take it that way. Yeah, Stefan and Jay first. Yeah.
Jay, please.
Sure, I'll try to go very quickly and save time for others. So just a few very quick comments. In terms of leading edge in Europe, I will say I think the only possible way to do that is by attracting, you know, non-European companies at this point. There are 3 companies in the world who I think are candidates for that, you know, TSMC, Samsung, and Intel. In terms of why do you need subsidies at all, that's a longer conversation, but very briefly, almost all of the cost of building a manufacturing plant is in the building and the equipment that goes in the building, and that's the same wherever you do it. And so the additional differentiators are largely subsidies and how long it takes you to get that plant up and running, because otherwise you have billions of dollars of equipment just sitting idle. And so, you know, things that both Europe and the US, until, you know, potentially the CHIPS Act, were not particularly good at, are moving large projects quickly through all the approvals and the bureaucracy and the red tape. And just simply not competing on subsidies. So if you look at the companies, the regions of the world who have been successful, Taiwan, South Korea, Israel, you know, other places that have sort of played the subsidy game, you know, that's frankly how you get an advantage. And, you know, people may not like it, but we have a couple of decades of evidence that's, you know, tends to be successful. I'll pass it to Stefan.
Right, thank you. So I can. I agree with that. So there's a subsidy race worldwide to attract these new manufacturing sites. I mean, there are not that much new manufacturing sites on offer, if you like. And once you get attracted one of these new plants, you will get something which lasts for, say, 10, 20 years. There will be a huge push to the region in terms of knowledge, in terms of advanced knowledge, in terms of additional companies and all the value chain which will flourish around this new plant. So I think it's a good investment for the taxpayer, as long as we can make sure that the new manufacturing site is interlinked, entangled with the regional ecosystem. That's key.
I agree with Stefan.
So I leave the floor for last comments to Niclas and Piotr.
Okay, so being very, very brief, I completely agree. So you need to have an ecosystem created if you want to have the production capacity in Europe with such high diversity, some state aid possible. There's a possibility to do that, but I truly believe that a secure supply chain is probably more feasible from a European perspective. I just don't see us easily getting there. And especially that after this crisis is gone, so when we reach overcapacity in 2023, probably we're just gonna remember this discussion we have right now and forget about the recommendations that we gave. So probably this could be just a one-off situation for the next, I don't know, 7 or 8 years that we won't see any shortages on the market.
Thank you.
Yeah, just maybe to sum up, I think in general we all agree, I think, on this panel now on the importance of this, and it's always a blessing and a curse, or blessing and or curse in disguise, I don't know, to have this at such a high political level that we have now this CHIPS Act. I mean, on the one hand, that we have a lot of political discussion about this, we have the political capital invested in kind of into the sector, and I think that is a big thing to be welcomed. But it also means that maybe the goals might not. We get into different discussion. We get really into the geopolitical discussion, and the fabrications here are a very salient thing to have. If you can open, as a politician, you can open a fabrication plant. It's the thing that everyone has in their mind, is the capacity of semiconductor production. But actually, all the parts that go into it are much less salient, but maybe not less important. So I think really, for me, the important part is really to think about the scenarios. Why are we doing this? What is our goal? And then to look at, if we invest that much money into it, really to make a deep assessment of what's the right thing, what is the right parts of the value chain where we build on, and then not trying to fight comparative advantage. In the end of the day, we lost the ICT, not just the semiconductor, but all our smartphone laptops are produced in East Asia. We're not going to get this back anytime soon. We have different value chains which are mostly European, where we have a strong part. So I think really it's about focusing on the right parts and trying to invest the money as efficient as possible.
Thank you, Niclas. We lost the ICT. I hope we won't lose the EV, the electric vehicles, the 5G. There's so many more industries coming for which we need chips. So I do hope we are right on this idea that there will be overcapacity and that's it. We'll forget about it. I hope we are. Otherwise, we may still think, oh, what was those subsidies? Maybe they didn't look as big as Jay was saying, as we thought they were. Yeah, and others put the money and we didn't. I mean, I'm not arguing that the conclusion. I'm just saying that we don't really know, and that's the beauty of this conversation, that we can take it back in a year, see what happened, and frankly speaking, we can have the very same speakers because it was a great event. Thank you everybody for your time, your wonderful contribution. Thank you. Have a good remaining of the day. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.